I have felt emotions deeply for most of my life. Some emotions brought with them a depth so intense and consuming, with currents that were so swift and so mighty that I had no other option than to turn them off. In a desperate effort of survival, I built a dam to wall off the flow and the release of such currents. Silence, dissociation, self-isolation. For the longest time, I felt as if I didn't have a voice. Or more so, that I didn't have the space to exercise that voice authentically. But it hasn't always been this way. Before I was born, my grandma used to call me Ollie. While I was within my mother's womb, my grandma said it was as if I was constantly swimming and flopping around within my fluid-like home. She relentlessly advocated for that to be my name, and while it wouldn't be, the energy of this essence still came into fruition in me as a small child. You couldn't get me out of the creeks that I grew up in, catching crawdads, adapting to the temperature of the water, learning about the local wildlife, and exploring the sensory deprivation of being underwater. It was both quiet and quite explorative. But at some point, this feeling of safety and exploration shifted. In my teen life, I would find myself trying to express my emotions in the solitude of my soul. I spent years attempting to desensitize myself to the sound of my own words and the rushing currents of my own mind, body, and spirit. Some days it felt like I barely had my nose above the water, occasionally gasping for air. And other days I found myself drowning, clawing to break the surface of the water. I even recall having dreams of being in the deep sea, surrounded by the black abyss, with the terrifying sense that there was something large lurking just out of sight in the water. I was weighted down by the colossal mass of generational and cultural suppression. I was taught the best coping mechanisms that our society had to offer, in a time where it was common practice to physically harm your child, to let them cry it out, and to neglect their emotional needs. Your best shot at survival is cultivating a quiet resilience. And for some, the repercussions of this can be felt for a lifetime. But is that merely surviving? Is this merely what it means to be a cell in our society? To be born into a culture that implies emotion as an expression of weakness, where the default response for so many is entrenched in some form of suppression, call it addiction. Where within our nervous system is a predefined response and this general instinct to turn away from that which is painful or hard to look at. And that is natural, but it is our response to this which makes us sick. Our current culture seems to reflect this sickness. Corporations viciously fight for our dollar and our attention. Capitalism and consumerism have become our gods. Depression rates rise exponentially. Diseases of civilization wreak havoc on American families. Self-interest wins over the good of the all, and we plunder groups of our people based on generalizations and misinformation. We're more distracted than ever. These are the tsunamis that wreak havoc on our soul. And it's bleak, I know. But in order to lay the groundwork to eventually shift into a new paradigm, we need to zoom out and we need to get a scope of the ecology that we are currently swimming in. To my psyche, water comes through as a powerful symbol. It can be seen as the unconscious mind, purifying and cleansing, the trickling and stagnation of our own emotions, the ebbing and flowing down the ravines of our life, the insistent power of erosion on earth, and the force that encourages growth with the promise of life. It could come through in a great destructive wave, or it could be that which soothes and cleanses the soul, similar to rituals and baptisms. So, what is there to do about this? How do we begin to tap into the soul of our emotional body so we can begin to nurture the seed that begs to create change? It is art. It is common intuition that the artist archetype is the bridge that we're invited to cross in order to feel deeper into our emotions, no matter how dark, no matter how beautiful. How many times would I find myself in my car or at a show screaming, singing, and half sobbing along to lyrics that touched into gut-wrenching topics like hopelessness, depression, or heartbreak?
I think the closest I've ever come to God was at a Radiohead concert. And I saw Radiohead at the Hollywood Bowl, and song after song after song from In Rainbows came up, and I was just like, my face was melting, and I felt one with the world, and I just felt love and ebullience and joy, and I was just absolutely mesmerized and transformed, and I was like, this is like the most religious experience I've ever had.
It's now clear to me that I struggled to have the courage to invite those emotions in without using music as a catalyst. Many times I didn't even realize the depth of my own emotions until the thread of music and lyrics gingerly pulled it out of me. And then before I knew it, I would be moved to tears in an indescribable way. For me, it was learning how to playfully splash in the uncomfortable waters of all that which scared me, which meant adapting to the seemingly cold creeks and circumstances which graced me. That being my emotions, my fears.
First, the perspective of how do I get to a point where all that's within me, all these things that I feel, these ideas that I have, this vision becomes a reality. So that took so much stepping outside of my comfort zone. We call it throw yourself in the water.
And for as difficult as a journey that has been, it's been equally, if not more, beneficial to have gone through the struggle. As I got closer to my bravery, I noticed the difference in my perception of the water. What were once crashing waves were now the calm waters where I warmed my muscles, I soothed my body, and I cleansed my soul. But even I am still learning how to adapt. In my recent years of continued education, I found myself for the first time in my life doodling. I've never been much of a visual / pen to paper kind of artist. It was a muscle that was underdeveloped with the self-limiting thought that it was just something I couldn't do. Yet here I was, putting pen to paper during my lectures. For a while, I was unsure of what I was drawing. It was just a pattern that came through in a mindless daze while I paid attention to the words of my teacher. I started to zoom out, and I seen the flow. I seen the waves. I seen the ebbing and the flowing of my own psyche, and I felt into the intensity of going to work and school full time. This was quite literally such a soul-stretching experience that I had no other option than to break down under the pressure of it. But this time I welcomed it, and I was within a community that held me, that was life-changing, soul-shifting, worldview-shattering. I dream of a future not only for myself, but for the world around me, where we not only endure our emotions, but we welcome them, and we allow ourselves to fall into the tearful and compassionate embrace of our community. When we encourage the expression of the soul, no matter how deep, no matter how dark it may seem, we find healing. We find connection. The vehicle for which we get to explore that is through art. Art is how we alchemize our pain, our joy, and our frustration. Art is how we experience it in our body and in our psyche. We do it through music, movement, images, symbolism, and ecstatic expression. Art is the vehicle for revolution. For the longest time, I felt as if I didn't have a voice. To not use it now feels as if I would be taking that for granted if I didn't integrate and share my knowledge and experience. And that's what this channel is about. It is here we will experience, experiment, explore, expand, and imagine immensities. Thank you.